police were now confident of bringing murder charges. But waiting on remand in prison, Wright was still claiming innocence, even to his father.
I had a letter from the prison to say that I'd been put on a visiting list by Steve, and I made an appointment, and I went through the arrivals, and then he declined to see me. I come away not having seen him. I wrote him a letter, and he wrote me one back. My head seems to be all over the place at the moment, so please try and sort this out. You say you want to help, so please do that one thing for me, but I don't know what he means. He never, explained.
Wright's letter hinted at an unhappy childhood, something his father disputes.
Whenever I get upset, I tend to bury it deep inside, which I suppose is not a healthy thing to do, because the more I do that, the more withdrawn I become, because I have seen so much anger and violence in my childhood to last anyone a lifetime. Now, I've tried to find out what this violence and anger is, but I just don't know. I don't know what he's talking about.
On the 14th of January 2008, Wright went on trial charged with murdering all 5 women. Any hopes that he'd buckle under the weight of evidence soon came to an end.
Not guilty.
He maintained his innocence throughout.
By the time Wright took to the stand, we were several weeks into the trial. Suddenly, the tension rose, and it became incredibly interesting, of course, to hear what he actually had to say for himself. It was the first time any of us had even heard him utter a word.
There are a number of coincidences in this case, are there not, Mr. Wright? Are there not?
It would seem so, yes.
Well, let us consider just a few of them, shall we?
There were 57 different coincidences which were put to him, and to everyone he gave pretty much the same answer, which was, it would seem so, yes.
Shall we start with your DNA? That is another coincidence, is it not?
It would seem so, yes.
Because it would seem that your full profile is on the bodies of the 3 women who were recovered from dry land. Is that a coincidence?
It would seem so, yes.
It seemed to me that an innocent man would have attempted to elaborate a little bit more. Giving this same answer time and time again suggested he had something to hide.
The coincidences kept coming. DNA profiles of the victims found on dry land were on Wright's gloves. The blood of Paula Clennell and Annette Nichols was found on his reflective jacket, and fibres from Wright's home were connected to 4 of the 5 bodies.
The fact is, there are no coincidences in this case, are there, Mr. Wright? The fact is that you murdered each of these women.
No, I did not.
It was a pretty nervy trial. We'd been under pretty immense pressure, and as we'd got towards the end of the trial, that pressure just increased. The weight of expectation was pretty immense, as you can imagine.
But in the end, the jury adjourned for just 6 hours before delivering its verdict.
Guilty, the serial sex killer and his campaign of murder.
At 12:30, the gates of Ipswich Crown Court slowly opened. Led by 3 police outriders, the prison van carrying Steve Wright emerged. From behind the barriers came shouts of abuse. Scum, one man screamed. No! An evil killer, incarcerated forever.
Wright was now officially a serial killer and branded as one of the most evil men in Britain. His father, finding it almost impossible to accept, wrote to him one last time to get the truth.
Myself, I don't believe and can't even imagine how any one person could have carried out 5 murders in so short a time. And quite honestly, I don't think you could even kill a rabbit. I just don't think there's enough aggression in him. If I had a rabbit in the garden, I said, I want, can you go and wring its neck? He wouldn't be able to do it. Well, Steve, that's it from me now. If I get nothing from you, then I believe you are telling me something I'd rather not hear. In other words, if he was guilty, I was thinking if he don't write, then he's telling me he's guilty. That was the way I wanted to put that across. He didn't write anyway.
Wright's father may have found it hard to believe he was a multiple murderer, but others did not. And as more evidence about his past emerged, some were beginning to ask, had he killed even more?
He went for us with a knife. He was so strong. He really was. He used to call himself the mean machine.
Serial killer Steve Wright had been found guilty of the murders of 5 young women in Ipswich. But what made him do it? In a letter he sent to his father while on remand, he had talked of an unhappy childhood, but according to psychologists, a miserable past is no pointer to a violent future.
It's all too easy to look to childhood events as the cause of bizarre behaviours like this, but generally speaking, they will not be a sufficient cause. Most people have had unpleasant experiences in childhood, but they don't turn out to be serial killers.
But other aspects of Wright's life do fit the profile of a multiple murderer. He demonstrated erratic behaviour, he drifted from job to job, and he'd been married twice.
Serial killers very often have little to be proud of in their background. They have no career path, they have no stable relationships, they tend to be socially awkward, perhaps ordinary but a bit unpopular.
After leaving school with no qualifications, Wright was pot washing for the Merchant Navy when he met his first wife and moved to Wales. By the age of 22, he was working as a steward aboard the QE2, where he was to meet his second wife.
I first met Steve in 1984. He used to inundate me with flowers and presents, and he was quite a charmer, really. He had a very possessive streak, though. Very possessive, which I didn't like. When I worked on QE, I'd been ashore once. I walked back to the ship with the shop manager, and when I got to the cabin, it had written on the cabin, "Slag, whore." I opened the cabin door and he said, "You like to weigh that much? There's your grass skirts." And he cut my skirts up into grass skirts, my uniforms. And then he went for us with a knife, and whether he went to hit me with it, I don't know, but it stuck in the door. He was so strong. He really was. He used to call himself the mean machine.
Descriptions of Wright's behaviour from ex-partners and relatives suggest that he did have a tendency to rage, which would spring up quite unpredictably, and that would suggest a lack of restraint, a lack of inhibitory processes that might prevent most people from acting out dangerous sadistic fantasies.
Wright also displayed another typical trait of serial killers. His murder methods showed he knew how to dispose of incriminating evidence without leaving a trace.
What it suggested potentially was somebody who had awareness of forensic issues and had perhaps taken time to remove any potential discovery of evidence. By placing their bodies in water, it clearly reduced the opportunities significantly for us. By removing clothing, that potentially reduces the opportunities. The fact that we didn't find any clothing clearly reduced our opportunities.
Wright sort of fits the profile of a serial killer in every respect except age. He was 48 at the time of the Ipswich killings, and that is amazingly middle-aged by the usual standards of serial killing, where usually they have begun their activities perhaps mid to late 20s or early 30s at the latest.
But had Wright really left it until his late 40s to begin killing, or had he started earlier? Those who have delved into his background point to patterns of behaviour, unsolved deaths and methods of murder, all of which suggest that the number of his victims may be even higher than the official tally.
On leaving the QE2, Wright married Diane, and they managed a pub in Norwich. Just as he would do in Ipswich, Wright moved into the heart of the city's red light district.
It was frequented by sex workers, and he was known to many of those women. It also emerged that there were unsolved murder cases involving prostitutes, women who went missing, and that obviously sent alarm bells ringing.
The families of unsolved murder victims in East Anglia began asking questions about the so-called Suffolk Strangler. One of them was the father of murdered prostitute Michelle Bettles.
Once Steve Wright had been arrested, and obviously then more information was being released, at that point the wondering about was, or could he have been involved in Michelle's death, obviously became stronger, because there was lots of connections you can put there.
Tonight, we start with the continuing search for the killer of a young woman who worked as a prostitute in Norwich. Michelle Bettles' body was found in woodland on the outskirts of the city 3 weeks ago. She'd been strangled, she was only 22, and she had 3 young children.
In 2002, Michelle travelled to work in Norwich's red light district, not far from the ferryboat inn.
As far as we know, the last sighting was actually 3 days before Michelle was found. There's 3 days of her life that we've not got a clue where she was or what happened. Michelle had drifted into drugs, prostitution, and everything else.
In all, 4 prostitutes have gone missing since 1992 in East Anglia. Mandy Duncan and Kelly Pratt have never been found. But the similarities between Michelle Bettles and Natalie Pearman's cases and those of the Ipswich Five are undeniable.
Some of the clothing from the girls in Ipswich is missing, and in Michelle's case there's clothing missing as well. You've then got the situations where all the girls were found, or most of the girls were found, with it being always in woodlands, not too far from water. If Steve Wright is responsible for not only Michelle's death, but Natalie Pearman and the other girls as well, then he should be charged with that. And then their parents can actually turn around and say, it's over, sorry.
We're looking at Steve Wright's lifetime timeline to look at his particular movements to see if in fact he may have been responsible for murder in the past, but at this particular time, that remains just that speculation.
Today in Ipswich, it's a different red light district to the one Steve Wright once terrorised. The authorities responded to the murders by declaring a zero-tolerance policy towards curb-crawling and street sex workers.
There's still a very small hardcore of women who are determined to work the streets of Ipswich. But perhaps what's different now is they've got the right support mechanisms in place. It's incredibly difficult. The problem is not prostitution, it's drugs and the damage that does, and that's where they need the support.
Being treated like a normal person just feels really nice, just not to be looked at and criticised, you know what I mean? So that's just really helped, like, boost your confidence.
But for the victims' families, the fact that the streets have been cleaned up is simply too late. And the fact that Wright still refuses to admit his guilt remains hard to accept.
I wish we still had the death penalty, as this is what he truly deserves. He murdered 5 girls, but at the same time has ruined a lot more lives.
At the end of the day, you've got to remember that every one of those prostitutes is someone's daughter, or a mother even. And people tend to forget that and realise you're not dealing with a story, you're dealing with people.
This is for the families who have lost their daughters, including us. They can't take away our memories. They can't take away our love, our fortitude, our courage.
I'll forgive her for anything that she's done. And my heart goes out to these 5 victims.
But there is also another victim, the father who never knew about his son's terrible secret. While Steve Wright spends the rest of his life in jail, he must serve his own unbearable sentence.
Is he innocent? I don't know. Is he guilty? Everyone's telling me he is. But I just cannot see him capable of doing it. The thing is, the whole thing can never be put right. And if there was a wish, five young girls had their life taken.